this is a really good location. It's been pretty interesting to see what's played out here over the last 15 to 20 years.
Great city, super dynamic, and this is, for a lot of people, where you want to be in Charlotte.
It feels like the mess that they're bringing us is going to be hard to create the outcome that they're promising.
Having a adaptive reuse warehouse in an area where people are doing good sales already is a terrific thing.
Hey, Michael here. Welcome to Real Estate Anonymous. Today, in my opinion, was a pretty magical episode. It was an opportunity for me to watch Eric just go through and talk through like 40 years of experience in a particular asset class type as we looked at this deal in Charlotte. And the brokers have positioned it as this mixed reuse of some light industrial stuff, just totally the things that Eric has been doing for decades. And for me, Brett and I got to be passengers as part of that. And Brett had good stuff too. But this was a great episode. Check it out. Really learned a lot personally, and I think you will too. Here you go. I feel bad, guys, because I feel like I used my best funny bit before we started recording. So I'll try to bring my
You can weave it back in, Girdley. That's okay.
I had a funny cultural reference, but anyway, we'll work into the episode.
You got more. You got way more. I know that
you're just getting started.
All right, go, Brett. What are we talking about? Well, wait, what happened this week?
Yeah, so this week, I think, Eric, you and I chatted about it before we started recording. We've got some household names getting back into the game on buying real estate, or at least threatening to. So it does feel like things anecdotally are getting better out there. And we'll kind of see where some of the pricing on these new deals shake out, which I think everybody's looking for today.
I can't get this out of my mind. Okay, so if you had a McDonald's, just to kind of put some edges around this idea, if you had a McDonald's ground lease, it's not out of the question that they would pay around $100,000 a year. You know, most of those ground leases are maybe $80,000 to $300,000 a year, and right now those things are still selling at a sub 5 cap rate. Let's just say 4 3/4. That's almost $2.2 million to buy a $100,000 ground lease from McDonald's. Okay, that's one edge of it. If you're a, and I'm going to weave this together. If you're a teacher in America, I think the average salary is like $60,000. Same thing for a fireman, in that range. I'm in a bar yesterday afternoon, and the owner is telling me he's got this machine in the corner called Golden Tee.
Yeah.
You guys ever played Golden Tee?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a golf video game. It's even smaller than a pinball machine. This cat's making $104,000 a year out of quarters going into the Golden Tee machine. Okay.
That's crazy.
So, like, at one edge of this, you can go run into burning buildings, okay, or you can spend your day dealing with angst-ridden teenagers for years, or you can come out of pocket $2 million. All these things can get you somewhere around $100,000 or less, or you can put a video game in the corner of a bar. It's fantastic. That's America right there.
That's what makes America great, is that right there.
So is this an outlier machine? Is this like better than they perform normally? Like, should I be doing this?
Yeah, I think it's a really good machine. And he had, so in that world, there are, and it's come down substantially. He used to be much higher, but in that world, there are tournaments and people get really into it. And apparently the Michael Jordan of Golden Tee used to play there, and he would come and sit and people would watch him play or play against him or want to do this. I did learn, so he'd sit there and eat chicken wings and drink beer all day and play Golden Tee. The fact remains that, you know, a small corner, a 10 square feet of space in the right location, this is real estate at its finest, can generate you $100,000 a year. Fantastic.
Not that it's real estate related, but it reminds me that the Mecca where everybody goes who wants to set records on Space Invaders or Joust or Galaga or any of those old Pac-Man, they all go to this one arcade that's located on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. Have you guys heard about this? Do you know about this? There's lots of like weird like YouTube videos on it, which is how I learned most of my information about the world. But but documentaries about these guys going back and forth, you know, in the 90s and early 2000s to see who could like beat Mrs. Pac-Man or like do that with Tetris. So like, I don't know if you guys know this about Tetris, but Tetris wasn't designed to go past a certain number of levels. So it actually starts glitching, like and changing colors and all this weird kind of stuff. And but whenever you go to set the official record, you go to like this kind of dingy looking arcade outside of, well, near Laconia, New Hampshire. It's near Lake Winnipesaukee. It's about an hour and a half outside of Boston. But you can go to this kind of famous World Arcade if you ever want to set the record on Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man, either one, whatever you guys are into.
Well, I would say, Girdley, wouldn't that be a great potential tenant for the defunct 80s mall stores too? I mean, we could get them to relocate to this facility, to the imaginary mall we're going to develop.
I truly believe this. I truly believe this podcast will not be a success until we partner on that project and we all lose a lot of money.
How are you doing on YouTube? Have you worked your way through it yet? How many episodes of YouTube have you got left to watch?
So of how many do I need to watch, or like making YouTube videos?
Just watching. I wanted to see how many of them you've gotten through.
I'm about 2 or 3% through everything. Yeah, I've got some work to do.
Still on the surface.
All right, let's get serious about business here, Brett. What do you got this week?
So this week is a deal called the Quarter, which is in the south end of Charlotte, very dynamic location just outside of the CBD in Charlotte. And the existing property is 3 buildings totaling 131,000 square feet that are leased to industrial users, with some lease term left here. But I think the play and the positioning of the opportunity would be redeveloping the site, which again is in a very dynamic submarket of Charlotte, and you know, probably putting retail users in there would be my guess. But I think, Eric, you probably are going to have the secret sauce on how to look at this. But just for everyone's benefit here, this is the location within Charlotte, so you've got a lot of new multifamily there, and you know, again, just kind of outside of the CBD. So having been a former Wachovia Bank guy, this is a really good location. It's been pretty interesting to see what's played out here over the last 15 to 20 years.
Yeah, south end of Charlotte is gold. Charlotte, great city, super dynamic, and this is, for a lot of people, where you want to be in Charlotte. Okay, what else do they say about it?
So, Brett, this is currently industrial, and they're pitching it as conversion to this retail kind of modern vibe thing. Is that?
That's my understanding of this. So the buildings are 20% occupied with 10 years of lease term left, which is not ideal, and no clue how the tenants are doing there. But that obviously, based on some of the other conversations we've had on some of the previous podcasts, that does create a challenge to kind of work through that. If somebody was going to try to buy out the lease there.
So I mean, if it gets to this point where it's, I mean, they seem to have their mindset on this as the ideal best use. If it gets to this point and they haven't been able to have any kind of path forward with the holdout tenants to get them out with 10 years remaining, should I just go ahead and assume they've probably failed and I'm going to likely fail also, or are they just maybe a lazy broker? Nothing against brokerage.
Well, no, I mean, there's a lot against brokerage. I'm the first to admit that. I mean, I think that's part of the value add play. But Eric, what are your thoughts about, you know, opportunities you look at where there's in place leases that are more than 12 or 24 months out?
Well, that's always a trick. I think, you know, the gold of these warehouses is finding these, you know, mid-century or earlier warehouse buildings that were renting for $3 or $4 or $5 or $7 a square foot, and then converting them into retail and entertainment restaurant spaces that can pay $30, $40, $50 a square foot. And that's a really good business when you can do it. The tricks are, you've got to be in a place, you got to be proximate to a place where people have dough and they want to spend it. This has that, South End. The other trick with these things is parking. Parking's always the challenge with these because they were built almost exclusively as, for warehouses, which have a much lower parking requirement than, retail and restaurants. So oftentimes you'll see these things where one or more of the buildings gets torn down, or you park inside one of the buildings or something like that so that there's enough parking to support it. And then some of the other tricks are the dimensions of these spaces can be really large. So whereas most of the people that occupy them that can pay these high rents need space that's relatively small. So you might have a, 30, 40, 50,000 square foot building, and the folks that can really pay the rent only need 1,000 to 5,000 square feet. So you got to see how these things can get chopped up, and that takes money. And then, with something like this in the South End, there's two dynamics going on. You want to be where the action is. So these things tend not to work if they're, out on an island somewhere. They want to be where the other action is, which certainly is in the South End. But then there's this tension that if everybody's already there, you can be left where there's sometimes just not enough tenants to go around. And if you're slightly off pitch, if you're not really in the heart of it, then you can be left kind of holding the bag without being able to attract these folks. If you look at the aerial here, Atherton Mill is at the kind of top of the aerial there. For South End of Chicago, that's ground zero, and fantastic development. That's redevelopment that some friends of mine have done, really first class in every way. And then you see all these other things, but the other trick with warehouses is it looks like this one is sometimes they're at the end of the line, and they're built for distribution, not for commerce oftentimes, which kind of, at least on the aerial, appears like this one might be.
Yeah, that's where my head went on it. Like we're on the edge next to the freeway, best I can tell here. Like this requires you to be kind of part of the walkable path of stuff to get people to come to this type of retail. So that was my question looking at it. And I guess this is only one of those things that you can really get a feel for if it's going to work for retail by just going and visit it on site. Eric, is that?
I think that's right. I love the optimism of this package. Stability with upside. Yeah. At 20% occupancy.
That's having your
and 9 years of weighted average lease term. The property offers a blend of stability and immediate upside. It's fantastic. I think that's kind of the, you finding the, retail's an interesting beast. There's a herd mentality that comes along with it, where a certain, having a couple of really vibrant, strong operators begets more of them, and it takes, people will go and follow wherever they see sales, they'll follow. And having a adaptive reuse warehouse in an area where people are doing good sales already is a terrific thing. I think the trick here is finding out if you're too far away from it. It's also interesting that you'd be selling it at 20% occupied with a product like this, which to me kind of smells like opportunity. What's our number one discussion point on this is all good deals share one characteristic, and that's a motivated seller. Maybe that exists here.
I like that term. We need motivated sellers, motivated people at the dance.
What do we think the story is with this property? Like, how do you get yourself down to 20% occupancy, like without like it seems like they've dug themselves into a hole. Like just owning this, I wouldn't have let myself get to that low of occupancy, or if I did, I wouldn't let I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me. I would have at least tried to push people onto shorter term leases and keep it higher occupancy. Like I'm just confused by what they've been doing with this property. Maybe that's part of the story.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a story here, but I do like the flexibility for uses, which I think Eric was touching on. So again, go back to this aerial. The properties aren't contiguous, which I don't think is a big deal. So arguably, you could kind of look at these as piece by piece. So maybe part of the play there is you work on leasing the 80% of the vacant space, and again, without fully understanding how that would work from a usability standpoint or what the uses are currently in the industrial facility. But again, going back to Eric's point too, I mean, this deal or these properties essentially abutting I-77 would lead to, being closer to major thoroughfares and a distribution type setup. But I think the walkability here would be, I mean, you've got a lot of density with residential units here, which would be very appealing to a lot of retailers, I would think, Eric. Is that a fair comment?
I think the other part of it is being proximate to the action. And here you've got, if you're not in the midst of the action, which this one is not, it's what have you got to bring the action to you? A couple other general thoughts. If you've got 130,000 square feet of retail space is a lot for anywhere. And usually to have that kind of space, you need, one or more anchors, something that's really going to drive, traffic to it, that's either you're next to or is part of this. So on a project like this, you've got to think, okay, if I'm at the end of the line and I need to create my own traffic, how am I going to do that? Who's the anchor going to be? And usually those are the ugly deals. So you might end up in a case like this where you're taking half the space and giving it away, or making a deal that's not super attractive to lure, somebody that's going to generate traffic for the rest of the property. So that's one kind of hurdle that you get yourself into. We talked about parking. Just eyeballing it from the aerial, the parking looks a little snug, so you might end up converting it. If you're converting it to entertainment, you might end up losing some more of that square footage converting it to parking. And then you've got the build out cost. That's where things have been getting a little bit crazy right now. Talking with some restaurant folks that occupy this kind of space earlier this week, and they're spending on average from a shell space, which this would be $800 a square foot to build out a restaurant. So if you had a 5,000 square foot restaurant, you end up spending $4 million to get it built. Somebody's spending that, either the occupier or the landlord, and that gets tough to make money on this kind of thing. So I go back to, there's a reason it's only 20% occupied, which can be good. That can be the opportunity. But usually you don't hire a big brokerage firm to put together a fancy package when it's only 20% occupied.
Yeah. I mean, the way they're positioning this, as I look at it, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it looks like from the aerial, there's 5 buildings, but they're split into 3 different separate tracks that are not contiguous. Right. And so you got that problem as well. And the funkiness of this last 10-year lease, like, I guess maybe the first thing I don't understand, putting myself in the broker's shoes, is like why they positioned it this way. Like, it seems like they're positioning exclusively for somebody that's going to kind of want to come in and do a full redevelopment of it, bring in the right tenants. And like my mind immediately went to like, well, why aren't they positioning this to like an owner occupier, right, who wants to move their business here and then wait out some of these other leases? Like it just feels, I don't know. It feels like the mess that they're bringing us is going to be hard to create the outcome that they're promising, and all this is, I guess what I'm saying, it's going to need to be somebody who's a little bit more flexible than probably the straight down the middle buyer that they're looking for.
Well, and sorry, I had to step away for a minute, but going circling back to Eric's comment about 130,000 square feet being a lot of square footage for retail, I completely agree with that. But what about potentially, knocking down one of these buildings, like that building, this building here would seem like that's the biggest site. Would seem if you, and I don't, not knowing if that's leased, but it would seem like if you knock that down, that might give you a little bit more flexibility and thoughtfulness around a user there.
Yeah, for sure. The knocking down buildings gets expensive.
Yeah.
Or paying for buildings that you're going to knock down can be a tricky exercise.
Given Occam's razor, I bet you the one that's leased, Brett, is the one that's the dead center middle building of that three bunch right there. So there's, for those of you not watching the video, this is split into three things, three different parcels that are not contiguous. One of the parcels has three buildings on it, and that's what I'm saying. I guarantee the one that's leased for 10 years below market is the one dead center in the middle of the triple.
Do you think you get view premiums from the apartment deals looking down on that industrial space right there? The worst they're going to say is no.
The other thing that is because this conversion idea, this adaptive reuse idea of converting mid-century warehouses in emerging groovy areas, because that delta that has existed of taking these rents, from single digits to 20 or 30 or $40 a square foot, you're seeing that play out and has played out across the Sun Belt. This is an example of that. But one of the things that's working against that is there's oftentimes only so many retailers and restaurateurs, and you kind of run out of users for such a thing. So there's a bit of a musical chairs element. Once those pieces are established, it's really hard to, unless it's a super dynamic neighborhood where the demand is just overwhelming, finding users for this kind of stuff once it's already established is tricky. My sense is, you're really removed from where the real action is in South End. And so you'd have to, I just don't know that there's enough users for something that's this far removed from it.
So let's say Eric, you see this listing and you want to consider doing this deal. Well, first of all, it sounds like looking at this listing, this probably wouldn't bubble up that you would dig deeper into it. Is that kind of the first thing reading between the lines of what you're saying?
I hear South End Charlotte. You have my attention.
Okay. So we have your attention. What's the next step for you? I mean, this seems like a total vibe centric play.
Yeah, I'd call it. I think the first move is call a couple of people that have locations there. A couple of Atherton Mill folks, or people that are on, I can't remember the name of that road that it sits on up there.
Tremont.
Find out what kind of volumes are happening. And well, there you go. 15-minute walk. That's a pretty aggressive walk,
especially in the summertime in Charlotte. You've got the light rail station right up here, which is pretty. I'm pretty sure that it's well used, but that's still a pretty long haul once you get off here at this light rail station.
But yeah, I think that, on these kind of things, it's really a couple of calls to people, get a lay of the land, what kind of sales volumes are happening, are people making money, what's trending there. And you can get a pretty quick reaction as to, this type of location, and is there room to do something large scale, this far removed, kind of at the back end of South End. I'd want to understand what sometimes the freeway visibility can be a really good thing. There's it looks like a lot of trees along I-77 there. Kind of an interesting thing that happens in the southeast along these interstates is you have a lot of trees. There's a right of way that's controlled by the feds usually, and when it has trees in it, you can't touch it without a whole lot of finagling. And so there's this visibility premium that, for whatever reason, when there aren't trees and you can see a building from a highway in a busy area, there can be a big premium that comes from that. And sort of there's this cottage industry too of lobbyists and lawyers, et cetera. We've used them from time to time that are simply in the business of getting trees removed from right of ways along interstates to make buildings more valuable. That might be something might have to make a few of those calls here.
Well, and so Eric, let's talk about users a little bit more. And I agree, you almost need like a loss leader in there. And I'm just trying to think of other users which kind of create destinations, which I think is what you want in retail. I mean, the Katie Ice House in Dallas is one. Not that I've spent any time there. Maybe I've spent a lot of time there, but obviously that uptown Dallas location is pretty dynamic as well. And I think that was probably a little bit more established. But I mean, that is kind of the go-to place for folks in their 20s to 50s, it seems like, on a nice day in Dallas. But something like that might be a draw.
Yeah, something like Katie Ice House or the Rustic, a large-scale music venue, or something like that. But usually those are, taking those things into consideration. Something like that might need 200 to 400 parking spaces. Looking at the aerial, that doesn't exist. So to create that is either a parking deck or removing some buildings, which gets, as you can imagine, can get pretty expensive, quickly. You also see another trick with the dimensions of these warehouses is that when they need to be made into smaller spaces, it also gets expensive because they can't, you've got space that gets to be, only can be interior and has no exterior windows, etc. So you end up having these, a lot of times with these buildings, is you'll see a courtyard or a light well cut into the middle of a building, and it ends up looking like a donut. And so that, again, is more lost space to create frontages for the interior building. So you end up with stuff that's really inefficient. And the reason these things work is there was a point in time when these type of buildings could be purchased really cheaply and then converted at modest expense to higher rents. Fantastic business. Buying them where they're not inexpensive in a environment where construction is really expensive makes this kind of thing more challenging.
Agreed.
So I don't know. I think the South End, great. And then the other way to look at it is, well, let me say one more thing about this. Another challenge that is happening in these kind of markets is, and we've seen this on some of the properties that we have as these old industrial areas become cool, property taxes get really high. And so you kind of get blocked out of being, you could say, well, it's a certain price. I could just lease it to a warehouse user, somebody that needed an in-town infill warehouse. The trick with that is you can sometimes be saddled with really high property taxes because everything around it is becoming shiny and groovy. And it makes the ability to occupy these, for warehouse use really tough. So I think to get comfortable here, my sense is you got to make a few calls, see who's doing business, see if that can be translated here, and then back into something where you've got, you've got enough parking to attract kind of some anchors to it. My sense is you end up at not being able to pay very much for this thing.
Well, not to derail the conversation, but I was just scrolling around on one of these third-party websites, and it looks like this 2320 Toomey Avenue, which I think, Eric, to your point, was or or Girdley, I think to your point was that building that was closest to the apartment deals there. It looks like that's already been redeveloped into 75,000 square feet of which I think is the picture you're looking at right here when I'm looking on this third party site. So I think that has already been redeveloped, and it looks like the user is 24 core, which I've never heard of that before. Not that that's a big deal, but and it looks like the owner here is Foundry Commercial, who is based here in Orlando. So that's the former CNL guys who are have a big presence in Charlotte as well.
There you have it.
That's one of my cool stories for the day, huh?
You said it's 4420? 4420, is that what you said it is?
It's 2320 Toomey Avenue.
Oh, no, the tenant.
Oh, the 20, Core 24.
I Googled 244, and it's a chain of pickleball shops.
This is pickleball country.
Yeah. Here. Well, there we go. Maybe we've got a user, like a chicken and pickle type thing, which I think is the other one that started in Kansas City.
Then it's like, I think the other issue with these type things, let's just say you did that the immediate outcome for something like this is a pickleball.
Yeah, there we go. It's all the rage these days.
Then how do you scrape it off your shoe? Because there's one thing to put in a pickleball court.
Right.
There's another one to sell it to somebody else. So who becomes the buyer of such a thing? That makes, that's these, adaptive reuses of warehouses is fantastic when it works. They can be super challenging
right.
for all these reasons. Most of it is which is cost.
But that should be reflected. The risk profile there should be reflected in the price, right? I.e., you're getting a much higher yield going in with the risk of doing the redevelopment play.
Yeah. Or you see the whole thing getting torn down and Topgolf going along the interstate here.
There's no pricing guidance?
I didn't see any in there.
This is a good one. I liked it. I don't know if I like the deal. I like what we talked about. So
yeah. I think finding when you can find a warehouse proximate to the action, this is it. Then it comes down to the nuance of how proximate and who else are you competing with. The interstate visibility, if there is some, can be a big plus. Being tucked in with all this residential, fantastic. Can you find enough users to fill up 130,000 square feet of retail and entertainment? Tall order when you're off-piste just a bit, as
right.
they say.
When it looks like 2213 and 2218, which are the first two parcels listed here, are owned by Abacus Capital, so different than Foundry, but Abacus is also the group that's doing the multifamily deal 70. Let me get that one back to this. So it's the multifamily group that's doing this development here, I guess owns these two parcels as well.
Yeah, and the other way to look at these kind of things is what is this value as multi? And maybe this was a big chunk of land bought by those folks. Maybe it was filled with these kind of buildings that have been torn down and replaced with multi. And maybe they've got their, maybe that was the plan to do the whole thing. And these are holding on to these for the time that it might take for the market to turn, to be excited about building more. Might not be in the cards right now, so let them go to low occupancy and sell them to the next person.
I think
but then you're getting into what's the land value of something like this, and can you keep it occupied enough? Can you not do much to it? Keep it occupied enough to pay your taxes until you can build residential on it.
And I think for the overall redevelopment plan, and I think what I heard you saying there, Eric, was kind of more patient capital and sweat some of the tenants out. But what would be even nicer if you could get control of these two buildings in between what's being contemplated in the offering. This building, and this building are being is what are the sites we're talking about here. But having control of these two would be would make this a lot more appealing from my perspective.
Yeah, what you're saying is there's 3 parcels being offered with kind of a hole in the middle
Right.
of them. Can you also buy the hole in
Yep.
the middle that's presumably owned by others and have a larger, more cohesive site? But yeah, I think in this market, I'm surprised. I'd be real surprised if you could buy it at a price that would allow you the flexibility to go out and find the kind of folks that would occupy this much space. Flip side is if you could, probably the best use of something like this is, holding it and redeveloping it with, with residential or, God forbid, maybe even office at some point in the future.
So it's funny you just mentioned office. So, and I would assume it's the same group, probably some of your neighbors in Atlanta, but Piedmont owns those 2 buildings in the middle there.
All right, you guys ready to wrap this one up?
Or no, that's not the broke.
Yep. Is that the pod?
I think that's there. Do we need to give a thumbs up, thumbs down on this one? A+ on our discussion. I think the deal is interesting. I think it's a good one.
A lot more questions than answers at this point, but I think we hashed out all the important questions on this week's podcast.
I think the answer is somebody tells you they got property for sale in South End of Charlotte. Your answer is yes, please. But then it's
what's the second city line? Yes, and
yes, and yeah. Well, and I think any episode we do where I get a 25-minute lecture on the microdynamics of hipster neighborhoods from Eric, like sign me up. Like I'll sit here. That's cool.
My response on this is I'm doing whatever Eric does here.
Yeah.
I like what Eric likes.
All right, gents.
All right, everybody. See you next week.